He was the sonic architect of the Bakersfield Sound, and arguably the most influential guitarist in modern country music. Yet he was the quiet man who always stood to the side. His name was Don Rich, the indispensable creative partner to superstar Buck Owens and the musical engine of their legendary band, the Buckaroos. At just 32 years old, at the absolute height of his powers, his life was cut short in a tragic motorcycle accident. This is the story of that loss, a tragedy that didn't just end a life, it silenced a musical revolution, triggered the creative collapse of a superstar, and proved that sometimes the most important man in the band isn't the one in the spotlight. To understand the revolution Don Rich and Buck Owens would ignite, you first have to understand the powerful gilded empire they were rebelling against. In the 1950s and early 1960s, country music had a capital city, a Vatican, and that city was Nashville, Tennessee. From the legendary recording studios lining Music Row, a new doctrine was being preached, a sound that would come to define the genre for a generation. It was called the Nashville Sound, and it was a deliberate, calculated, and brilliantly successful attempt to civilize country music. The high priests of this new religion were a handful of visionary producers, most notably RCA's Chet Atkins and Decca's Owen Bradley. They looked at the rise of rock and roll and the changing tastes of a more suburban, affluent America, and they saw a threat. Traditional country music, with its raw fiddles, crying steel guitars, and nasal backwoods vocals, was starting to sound dated, too rural, too hillbilly for the sophisticated new world of television sets and hi-fi record players. Their solution was radical. They decided to perform an elegant act of musical surgery. They would keep the heart of country music, its themes of loss, love, and heartache, but they would dress it in a tuxedo. Out went the fiddle, the instrument that had been the very soul of the genre for a century. In its place came entire string sections, playing swooning orchestral arrangements that could have been lifted from a Hollywood film score. Out went the raucous bar band piano. In came the gentle, sophisticated slip note stylings of Floyd Kramer. Out went the raw, ragged backing vocals. In came the polished, perfect harmonies of professional vocal groups who could blend like a church choir. The goal was crossover appeal. The goal was to take country music out of the honky-tonk and put it in the suburban living room, to make it respectable, palatable, and above all profitable. And it worked beyond their wildest dreams. Stars like Patsy Cline, with the lush, heartbreaking production of songs like Crazy, became national icons. The smooth, baritone crooning of artists like Eddie Arnold and Jim Reeves dominated the charts. The sound was nicknamed Countrypolitan, and it was the undisputed king. The Grand Ole Opry was its cathedral, its stars were its saints, and its producers were its popes. It was a beautiful, elegant, and powerful empire. But to a growing number of people, particularly those living far from the manicured lawns of Tennessee, it felt neutered. The pain was still there in the lyrics, but the raw, visceral gut punch of the music had been smoothed away, polished into a beautiful, but ultimately sterile sadness. But 3,000 kilometers and a world away, in the scorched, hard-working, blue-collar heart of California, another cathedral was being built. This one wasn't made of polished wood and stained glass. It was made of cheap beer, stale cigarette smoke, and sawdust-covered dance floors. This was Bakersfield, a hot, dusty, unpretentious city in the southern San Joaquin Valley. It was the absolute antithesis of the genteel, old-money manners of Nashville. Bakersfield was a town built on oil and agriculture, a place of hard labor and hard living. Its population had swelled dramatically during the Great Depression, as tens of thousands of families fled the Dust Bowl of the American plains. They were the Okies, the Arkies, and the Texans, immortalized in John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. They came west not looking for fame or glamour, but for work, any work, to feed their families. They picked cotton, harvested grapes, and toiled in the sprawling oil fields that surrounded the city. They were poor, proud, and resilient, and they brought their culture with them. Most importantly, they brought their music. And the music they loved wasn't polite. It was the loud, raw, unapologetic sound of the Texas dance halls and the Oklahoma roadhouses. It was Western swing and honky-tonk, music built for Saturday nights, designed to be a release after a brutal 60-hour work week. It was music to drink to fight to, and to dance to until the sun came up. The dozens of rough-and-tumble clubs that sprang up all over Bakersfield and its surrounding Kern County, legendary. Sweat-soaked joints like the Blackboard, Trout's, the Lucky Spot, and the Crystal Palace became the crucible for a new, rebellious kind of country music. This was a sound forged in noise and necessity. To be heard over the drunken din of a packed, rowdy Saturday night crowd, a band had to be loud. This meant amplification. This meant electric guitars, and lots of them. There was no room for subtle string sections or gentle backing choirs here. They would be completely drowned out. This was music built on a foundation of a rock-solid, driving, backbeat drum rhythm, something often absent from Nashville recordings. A thumping electric bass line, a wailing pedal steel guitar that cried and screamed, and a singer who wasn't afraid to shout. And most importantly, it was built on the sound of the electric guitar, specifically the Fender guitar, which was being built just a few hours down the road in Southern California. The Fender Telecaster, a simple, durable, brutally effective plank of wood with magnets, became the Excalibur of this new sound. It produced a tone that was bright, sharp, trebly, and piercing, a sound that could cut through any barroom brawl. It had a twang that was as sharp and clear as a switchblade. This was country music with the raw, aggressive swagger of rock and roll. This was the Bakersfield Sound. And for it to conquer the world, it needed two things: a voice and a soul. The soul of that revolutionary sound was born far from the California dust, in the green, perpetually damp climate of the Pacific Northwest. Donald Eugene Ulrich, who the world would come to know as Don Rich, was born in Olympia, Washington in 1941. He was not a product of the Dust Bowl migration, not a self-taught musician who learned to play on a rickety porch. He was a musical prodigy, pure and simple, a one-in-a-million talent who seemed to emerge from the womb with a perfect understanding of musical structure. His parents were working-class people who recognized an extraordinary, almost startling gift in their young son and did everything in their power to nurture it. They bought him his first ukulele when he was just 3, which he quickly mastered. He soon moved on to the guitar, but his true calling, the instrument that first brought him local fame, was the fiddle. His parents, seeing his immense potential, made a decision that would prove to be the secret ingredient in his future genius. They sent him to a local classical violin teacher. This was a crucial formative experience. While other future country stars were learning by ear from old records, Don was learning formal musical theory. He learned to read music fluently, to understand the complex architecture of harmony, melody, and rhythm. He developed a flawless technique, a disciplined and precise approach to his instrument. He was a phenomenon. By his early teens, he was already a seasoned and sought-after performer, a local celebrity who could dazzle audiences with anything from a complex classical sonata to a fiery, foot-stomping, hoedown fiddle tune. He possessed a rare and potent combination: the disciplined mind and technical facility of a concert violinist fused with the fiery, improvisational soul of a country fiddler. He had the formal training to understand why the music worked and the raw, natural talent to make it sing. This dualism, this ability to be both a technician and an artist, was the foundation upon which the entire Bakersfield Sound would later be built. Meanwhile, the voice of that sound was already down in Bakersfield, fighting for his life and clawing his way up from the bottom. Alvis Edgar Buck Owens was the quintessential Dust Bowl migrant, the living embodiment of the Bakersfield story. Born into grinding poverty in a sharecropper's shack in Sherman, Texas in 1929, he had come west to California with his family as a teenager, following the promise of work. The reality was a grueling existence of backbreaking labor, picking cotton and potatoes under the merciless valley sun. His escape from that life, his only hope, was music. He was a decent, hard-working guitarist and a passable fiddle player, but his true instruments were his staggering ambition and his unique, unmistakable voice. It was a reedy, nasal, high, lonesome tenor, a voice that was unapologetically, almost confrontationally country. It wasn't smooth or pretty, but it was powerful, emotional, and could slice through the noise of the loudest bar room on a Saturday night. Buck was, above all else, a survivor and a pragmatist. He spent years paying his dues in the grimiest honky-tonks in and around Bakersfield, learning his craft, studying the crowds, figuring out what made them dance, what made them drink, and what made them listen. He took a job playing lead guitar for another early Bakersfield pioneer, Bill Woods, at the legendary Blackboard Club, absorbing everything he could. He drove back and forth to Los Angeles for session work, playing guitar on records for other artists, from rockabilly singers to pop acts, soaking up the secrets of the recording studio. He was fiercely, relentlessly driven. He was stubborn, opinionated, and had a crystal clear, almost visionary idea of the kind of music he wanted to make. Hard driving, no frills, electric honky-tonk music that was the polar opposite of the syrupy, string-laden Nashville sound he heard on the radio and despised with a passion. He had the vision, he had the voice, and he had an ambition that burned like a wildfire. But he was missing the one crucial piece that could elevate his sound from merely good to truly great. He was missing his musical other half, his soulmate. Their worlds finally collided in 1958, not in the dust of Bakersfield, but in the damp air of Tacoma, Washington. Buck, whose own career was struggling, had temporarily moved north to take a job hosting a local live television show, the Bar K Jamboree. It was a steady paycheck, but his Bakersfield dreams were on hold. He was in the market for a new fiddle player for his show. Someone in the local music scene told him he had to check out a teenage prodigy who was the talk of the town, a kid who could play fiddle like nobody's business. Buck went to a local club to see him play. The kid, of course, was Don Rich. He was just 16 years old, but he played with the confidence and authority of a man twice his age. Buck was floored. He immediately recognized that he was in the presence of a rare and profound talent. The connection wasn't immediate or explosive. It was a slow burn. Buck, ever the opportunist, offered the teenager a job on the spot. But Don, still in high school and a diligent student, politely turned him down. His parents, who valued education, insisted that he finish school and go to college. But a seed had been planted in both their minds. Buck had heard something in Don's playing, not just the dazzling technical skill, but a fiery, rhythmic energy that perfectly matched his own musical vision. Don, in turn, had seen in Buck a man with a relentless, almost frightening drive to succeed that he found both intriguing and compelling. Don dutifully finished high school and enrolled in college to study business, but his heart wasn't in it. The call of music was too strong. His short, unhappy stint in academia convinced him that his destiny lay not in a classroom, but on a stage. He remembered the ambitious, hungry-eyed singer from Tacoma. He made a decision that would change the course of country music history. He packed his bags, left Washington, and headed south to the hot, dusty, unlikely musical mecca of Bakersfield. He found Buck Owens, who had since moved back and was starting to gain some real traction with a few minor hits on the Capitol Records label. This time, when Buck offered him a job, Don was ready. The year was 1960. The partnership that would define the Bakersfield Sound and change both their lives forever was about to begin. The stage was set. The ambitious frontman had found his prodigy, and the raw, energetic world of the Bakersfield honky-tonks was their shared laboratory, a musician's paradise and a brutal testing ground. When Don Rich arrived in 1960, he stepped into a city with a non-stop circuit of dozens of venues where a good player could work 7 nights a week. But the crowds were demanding and had little patience for music that didn't move them. This was the world where Buck Owens had been honing his craft for years. He had a contract with Capitol Records and a few minor hits, but he needed a spark, a formula to transform their raw talent into a sound the world had never heard before. In this teenage fiddle prodigy from Washington, he had found his secret weapon. The transformation that followed would happen not with the instrument that brought them together, the fiddle, but with a simple plank of wood, 6 steel strings, and an alchemical combination of 2 voices that would define a genre. Initially, that's exactly what Don was, the fiddle player. And he was, by all accounts, the best fiddle player in a town full of great ones. His solos were a dizzying display of technical brilliance and raw country soul. He could make the instrument weep on a slow ballad or set the sawdust on the dance floor on fire with a breakdown. He immediately elevated Buck's live show. But Buck Owens, a shrewd observer of talent and a man with a clear vision in his head, saw something more in Don. He saw a musical intellect, a deep understanding of structure and harmony that went far beyond the role of a simple sideman. And he noticed something else, the sound that was truly driving the Bakersfield scene. The sound that was cutting through the noise wasn't the fiddle. It was the electric guitar. It was in this period of intense experimentation in the smoky confines of clubs like the Blackboard that the most important moment in the history of the Bakersfield Sound occurred. It wasn't a hit record or a famous gig. It was a quiet conversation. Buck, who was a fine guitarist himself but knew his primary strength was as a singer and frontman, turned to his young fiddle player. He had seen Don toying with the guitar, and he was impressed by his quick grasp of the instrument. He handed Don a simple butterscotch blonde Fender Telecaster, the official weapon of the Bakersfield guitarist, and made a suggestion that would change everything. He encouraged Don to focus on the guitar, to become the lead guitarist for the band. It was a moment of pure alchemy, like a scientist stumbling upon the missing element in a formula. Don Rich, with his classically trained ear and his innate musical genius, approached the electric guitar not like a traditional self-taught country picker, but like a composer and an arranger. He wasn't just learning licks from other records, he was dissecting the very function of the guitar within a band. He understood that in a loud live setting, subtlety was useless. What was needed was clarity, rhythm, and a tone that could punch through the mix like a fist. The Fender Telecaster was the perfect tool for the job. Unlike the warmer, mellower tones of the Gibson guitars, favored by many jazz and pop players, or the Gretsch guitars used by Nashville session ace Chet Atkins, the Telecaster was a machine built for treble and attack. It had a twang that was as sharp and clean as breaking glass. In Don Rich's hands, this sound became an art form. He developed a style that was uniquely his own. It was a percussive rhythmic approach, often using the low strings to create a chugging, almost train-like momentum. And his lead lines were a revelation. He rarely played long, indulgent, bluesy solos. Instead, he crafted short, sharp, stabbing, and intensely melodic riffs and fills that were as crucial to the song's identity as Buck's vocal. They were hooks, mini-melodies within the melody, and they were utterly, addictively unforgettable. But the alchemy wasn't complete. There was a second ingredient that needed to be added to the formula. Buck Owens knew his own voice was a high, reedy tenor. He needed a harmony that could complement it without softening its edge. The Nashville sound was built on smooth, blended 3- or 4-part harmonies provided by vocal groups. Buck wanted something different, something rawer, more emotional. He turned again to his new guitarist. He asked Don to sing harmony. Once again, Don's musical intellect provided a revolutionary solution. Instead of singing the standard 3rd or 5th harmony part below Buck's melody line, which was the traditional country approach, Don used his clear, true tenor voice to sing a high, soaring harmony that often floated above Buck's lead. This created a unique and thrilling vocal texture. It was a tense, high, lonesome sound, a tight, almost brotherly blend that sounded both joyful and heartbreaking at the same time. It was the sound of two voices becoming one, a signature vocal blend that was as instantly recognizable as the Everly Brothers. The 1-2 punch of Don Rich's biting Telecaster and his soaring high harmony was the DNA of the new sound. It was the secret formula. The years of searching were over. Buck Owens had found his voice because he had found Don Rich. Now they just needed a band to build around this explosive new core. They called themselves the Buckaroos, and they were not just a backup band. They were a self-contained, high-performance engine. This was another radical departure from the Nashville model, where singers were often backed by an anonymous, interchangeable group of elite session musicians known as the A-Team. The Buckaroos were a band in the truest rock and roll sense of the word. They were a single, cohesive unit that rehearsed relentlessly and performed with the precision of a military drill team. Buck and Don found the perfect rhythm section to lock in their sound. On bass, there was Doyle Holly, a steady, reliable anchor whose simple, powerful bass lines were the foundation upon which everything else was built. On the pedal steel guitar, they eventually recruited Tom Brumley, a master of the instrument whose crying, swooping notes added a layer of pure, heartbreaking emotion to the sound. And crucially, on drums, there was Willie Cantu. In Nashville, drums were often mixed quietly or played with brushes to avoid sounding too much like rock and roll. Cantu, by contrast, was a powerhouse, driving the band with a hard, infectious backbeat that was impossible not to dance to. With this classic lineup solidified, they became an unstoppable force. They were more than a country band. They were a rock and roll power trio with a pedal steel and a fiddle. They were tight, they were loud, and they were about to take on the world. The breakthrough came in 1963. The song was Act Naturally, a clever, witty tune written by Johnny Russell. In the hands of Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, it became an anthem. It was the perfect showcase for their new sound. The driving beat, Buck's wry, country-to-the-core vocal, and most importantly, Don Rich's brilliant, chugging, instantly recognizable guitar riff and his perfectly pitched high harmony. The song shot to #1 on the country charts and stayed there for 4 weeks. The revolution had begun. What followed was one of the most dominant and astonishing runs in the history of American popular music. From 1963 to 1967, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos were a hit-making machine, a commercial juggernaut that seemed incapable of failure. The hits came in a relentless machine gun burst. Love's Gonna Leave Here, a massive crossover hit that spent an incredible 16 weeks at number 1. I've Got a Tiger by the Tail, My Heart Skips a Beat. The heartbreakingly beautiful ballad Together Again, which featured one of the most famous and influential pedal steel solos in history from Tom Brumley. Crying Time. Think of Me. They racked up an incredible, unprecedented 15 consecutive number 1 hits, a feat that no country artist had ever achieved. Their sound was a jolt of pure adrenaline, a welcome slap in the face to a country music scene that had grown comfortable, complacent, and overly sentimental. This was music you could feel in your bones. It was joyful music about sad subjects, a driving beat for a broken heart. It was the sound of the Bakersfield honky-tonk, polished to a diamond-sharp edge in the studio and unleashed upon the world. They were the anti-Nashville, and they were winning. The world had never seen a country band like them, and the world responded with a fanaticism usually reserved for rock stars. They broke out of the traditional country music circuit of state fairs and small auditoriums and started playing to college crowds and in rock and roll venues. They toured the world relentlessly, playing sold-out shows in places where country music was a foreign concept, like Japan, Germany, and England. They were mobbed at airports, their concerts treated as major cultural events. The ultimate validation of their crossover appeal came from the biggest band in the world. In 1965, the Beatles, who were fans of the band's raw energy and musical honesty, recorded their own version of Act Naturally, with Ringo Starr on lead vocals. It was a stunning tribute, a nod of respect from the kings of pop to the honky-tonk heroes from California. It was a clear signal that the Bakersfield Sound was not just a regional phenomenon. It was a global force. At the center of this hurricane of fame were two men whose personalities could not have been more different. Buck Owens was the consummate showman, the undisputed star. On stage, he was a magnetic, charismatic presence, funny, engaging, a natural-born entertainer who knew exactly how to work a crowd. Off stage, he was a shrewd, tough, and visionary businessman who, unlike most artists of his era, took complete control of his career. He owned his own publishing company, his own booking agency, and eventually his own recording studio and radio stations. He was building an empire. Don Rich was his perfect foil, the quiet eye of the storm. On stage, while Buck commanded the spotlight, Don stood slightly back, a picture of calm, focused intensity. A small, enigmatic smile often played on his lips as he effortlessly unleashed his torrent of brilliant guitar licks and flawless, soaring harmonies. He was the epitome of cool, understated confidence. He never tried to steal the spotlight from his boss. He didn't need to. His playing did all the talking, providing the constant, electrifying commentary to Buck's lead vocal. Off stage, he was known throughout the industry as a gentle, funny, and deeply professional man. He was the band's musical director and its conscience, the one who ran the rehearsals with a disciplined hand, ensuring every note was perfect. Every show was as tight and powerful as it could possibly be. While Buck was the dreamer and the deal maker, Don was the craftsman who made the dreams a reality. Their relationship was the heart and soul of the band's incredible success. It went far beyond that of a boss and a talented employee. They were best friends, brothers in arms. On stage, they had an almost telepathic connection, a musical sixth sense. A simple nod or a quick glance from Buck was all Don needed to know exactly where the music was going next. Whether to extend a solo, to drop the volume for a chorus, or to kick the energy up a notch. Buck trusted Don's musical judgment implicitly, more than anyone else's in the world. He once said in a moment of reflection, "Don Rich was a phenomenal musician. He could play anything, guitar, fiddle, banjo, you name it. But more than that, he just had this incredible God-given sense of what was right for the song. He never played too much and he never played too little. He just played right every single time." The absolute peak of their artistic validation, the moment that forever silenced any critic who still dismissed them as a bunch of hayseeds from California, came in the spring of 1966. In a move that shocked the music establishment to its core, Buck Owens and the Buckaroos were booked to play a concert at Carnegie Hall in New York City. This was the most prestigious, most revered concert hall in all of America, the historic home of classical music virtuosos and jazz legends like Benny Goodman. For a loud, twangy, electric country band from Bakersfield to be invited to play on that sacred stage was considered by many in the New York cultural elite to be nothing short of sacrilege. On the night of the show, the band was nervous, but Buck, ever the showman, was defiant. They walked out on that stage, and from the very first note, they didn't just play a concert. They made a statement. They proved that the raw, emotional power of their music could command the respect of any audience in any venue. The live album recorded that night, Carnegie Hall Concert, is a masterpiece, a perfect, electrifying snapshot of a band at the absolute zenith of its powers. They are explosive, precise, and radiate a sense of pure, unadulterated joy. Don Rich's performance on that album in particular is a tour de force. His guitar cuts through the pristine air of the hall with the clarity and precision of a surgeon's scalpel. His harmonies soar to the ornate rafters, a high, lonesome cry in the heart of the city. The album became a #1 hit and a landmark in country music history. It was the moment the Bakersfield Sound was no longer just a regional rebellion. It was a legitimate and powerful American art form. They had taken the raw, unapologetic noise of the honky-tonk and triumphantly placed it in the cathedral of American music. They were on top of the world, a seemingly unstoppable force of nature. But as the 1960s came to a close and the cultural landscape of America began to shift and fracture, new challenges and new opportunities would arise that would test their partnership and their musical identity in ways they could never have imagined. The biggest of these challenges would come not from a competing record or another band, but from the warm, glowing, and often treacherous glow of a television set. In 1969, the most consequential decision of their career arose, one that would test their musical identity. They went to Hee Haw. The show was the brainchild of two Canadian television producers who envisioned a country-themed version of the wildly popular, fast-paced comedy show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. It was designed to be a whirlwind of quick-cut skits, corny one-liners, and musical performances, all delivered with a self-aware hayseed charm. The network, CBS, was looking for a star with mainstream appeal and genuine country credibility to anchor the show. They found him in Buck Owens. For Buck, the offer was both a massive opportunity and a significant risk. The opportunity was obvious. A network television show offered a level of exposure that no amount of touring could ever match. It was a chance to bring his music and his brand into the living rooms of millions of Americans every single week, far beyond the traditional country music audience. It meant financial security on a scale he had only dreamed of in the cotton fields of his youth. It was a chance to become not just a country star, but a true American household name. The risk, however, was equally profound. Buck Owens and the Buckaroos had built their entire identity on being the anti-Nashville. the raw, authentic alternative to the polished, country-politan schmaltz. Hee-Haw, with its hokey humor and its production based in Nashville, was a step directly into the world of mainstream, family-friendly entertainment. It threatened to transform the hard-edged revolutionaries into a safe, syrupy caricature of the very thing they had rebelled against. Would the architects of the Bakersfield Sound, the titans of the honky-tonk, become just a couple of clowns in a cornfield, telling jokes alongside a talking mule? Buck, ever the pragmatist and the ambitious businessman, took the gamble. He signed on as co-host, and the Buckaroos, as the house band, came with him. The show was an instant, almost unbelievable success. It was critically panned as unsophisticated and lowbrow, but the American public adored it. It became a ratings juggernaut, one of the most popular shows on television, and would remain on the air for over 2 decades. Buck Owens was no longer just a country singer. He was a bona fide television star. His face and his howdy greeting recognizable to everyone, and at his side, as always, was Don Rich. If Buck was the star, Don was the show's secret weapon. He proved to be a natural on camera, possessing a quick wit and an easygoing charm that translated perfectly to the small screen. He was a regular in the comedy sketches, often playing the straight man to the more manic antics of the other cast members. He had his own beloved recurring segments like the Sad Tale So Sad, So True, where he would sing a comically tragic song, his face a perfect mask of mournful sincerity. He was in many ways more of a natural television personality than the sometimes stiff Buck Owens. He seemed to be having genuine fun. The show's relentless taping schedule, however, was grueling. For several weeks each year, the entire Bakersfield-based operation had to decamp to Nashville, the very city they had defined themselves in opposition to, for marathon recording sessions. It was a strange and ironic twist of fate, and while the show brought them a new level of fame and fortune, it undeniably began to change the band's musical focus and public perception. The artistic fire that had burned so brightly in the mid-'60s was now being channeled into 2-minute musical segments sandwiched between comedy routines. The long, exploratory tours that had kept them sharp and innovative were curtailed by the rigid demands of the television season. For many of their original hardcore fans and for music critics, this was a period of artistic decline. The Trailblazers, they argued, had become part of the very entertainment establishment they had once challenged. They had traded their artistic credibility for mainstream celebrity. It's a simple narrative, but the reality was more complex. The late 1960s and early 1970s were a period of immense change, not just for the band, but for music as a whole. And within the Buck Owens empire, Don Rich's role was quietly and profoundly evolving. He was becoming far more than just a lead guitarist and harmony singer. The massive success of Hee-Haw provided the capital for Buck Owens to realize his ultimate dream, to build a completely self-sufficient musical empire in Bakersfield, a West Coast Nashville to rival the original. He built his own state-of-the-art recording studio. He owned radio stations. He ran his own publishing and management companies. He was becoming the undisputed king of a country music fiefdom, a CEO in a nudie suit. And in this new empire, Don Rich was his most trusted viceroy. With absolute faith in Don's talent, Buck Owens delegated more and more creative work to him. Don Rich was promoted to the main producer for the Bakersfield Sound, shaping the sound for other artists like Susan Rae. This spread his creative energy thin, and his music with Buck began to change, becoming more polished and losing its original rebellious edge. At the same time, the pressures of touring and television caused the classic Buckaroos lineup to fall apart. One by one, Key members like Tom Brumley, pedal steel, Doyle Hawley, bass, and Willie Cantu, drums, left. Although the band was rebuilt, the magic and special chemistry of the original lineup was gone. The entire creative and emotional core of the musical empire now rested squarely on the shoulders of Buck Owens and Don Rich. In this period of stability, Don found freedom and release in motorcycles. However, Buck Owens had a deep fear and a terrible premonition about them. He repeatedly pleaded with Don to give up his passion, even bluntly warning him once, "That thing is going to kill you." This warning became a tragic premonition, but Don just laughed it off. Ironically, it was in this moment of peace at the summit that the tragedy was set, revolving around a single engine and an ignored warning. In the midst of this professional whirlwind, Don had cultivated a passion for something that gave him a profound sense of freedom, a precious escape from the pressures of his life. Motorcycles. Riding was his private therapy. On his bike, cruising through the golden, oak-studded hills and the vast open farm country around Bakersfield, or heading west to the dramatic, windswept Pacific coast, he wasn't the famous guitarist from Hee Haw or Buck Owens' indispensable sideman. He was just Donald Ulrich, a man on a machine alone with his thoughts, the roar of the engine and the rush of the wind. It was a private joy in a very public life, a communion between man, machine, and the open road. But this passion, this intensely personal source of freedom, made his best friend, his mentor, and his boss deeply, profoundly, and almost obsessively uneasy. Buck Owens, a man known for his strong opinions and sometimes strange, almost psychic premonitions about certain things, hated motorcycles with a visceral, irrational passion. He saw them not as symbols of freedom, but as instruments of death, as baroque, two-wheeled accidents waiting to happen. According to Buck himself, in countless interviews and in his own autobiography, and confirmed by virtually everyone who was in their inner circle at the time, he pleaded with Don repeatedly to give up riding. It became a constant, recurring, and sometimes tense theme in their otherwise harmonious friendship. Buck, who was a dozen years older and often played the role of a paternalistic, protective older brother to Don, saw a danger that Don, in his youthful confidence and love for the thrill of the ride, refused to acknowledge. In his autobiography, Buck recalled the conversations with a heartbreaking, almost painful clarity. I'd tell him, "Don, I'll buy you a brand new Cadillac, a Mercedes, anything you want. Just please, for me, sell that motorcycle." He continued, "It was a real source of friction between us. He'd just smile that easy smile of his and say, 'Buck, I'm a good rider. I'm careful. Nothing's going to happen to me.' But I just had this terrible, sick feeling about it, a feeling I could never shake." Doyle Hawley, the band's original bassist and a close friend to both men, remembered it just as vividly. He recalled a specific instance where Buck confronted Don directly and said with a chilling and prophetic bluntness, "That thing is going to kill you." It wasn't just a casual warning thrown out in conversation. It was a dark, deeply felt premonition, a nagging, visceral fear that had taken root in Buck's mind and wouldn't let go. Don, a proud, independent man who valued his freedom, would just laugh it off, reassuring his friend that he was being overly dramatic. It was a point of friendly but persistent tension between them, a dark premonition hanging like a storm cloud over a deep and abiding friendship. The year 1974 had been a busy one, filled with the usual demands of taping Hee Haw and playing select, high-profile dates. By midsummer, they were all looking forward to a rare and welcome break. Don had planned a short family vacation, a fishing trip on the beautiful central coast of California near the picturesque seaside town of Morro Bay. It was to be a few precious days of peace with his wife and his son, away from the studios and the stages. On the morning of Wednesday, July 17th, the day he was set to leave, Don went into the office at the Buck Owens Enterprises complex in Bakersfield. He had some work to finish up at Buck's recording studio. He was in high spirits, buzzing with the happy anticipation of his trip. Buck was there too, and the two friends spent some time together talking business and making plans for after the break. There was no sense of finality, no dramatic last words. It was just another normal day at the office for two men whose lives and careers were completely intertwined. In the early afternoon, Don finished his work. He said his goodbyes and prepared to head for the coast to meet his family, who had gone ahead in the car. It was a beautiful, clear, hot Bakersfield day. He made a simple, fateful decision. Instead of taking a car, he decided to take his new motorcycle, his prized Triumph. He wanted to feel the wind, to clear his head on the open road. It was the perfect start to a vacation. The ride from the inland heat of Bakersfield to the cool air of Morro Bay is about 140 miles, a journey that takes you from the brown agricultural plains of the Central Valley up through the winding, oak-covered hills of the coastal range, and finally out to the breathtaking majesty of the Pacific Ocean. Don was making good time. He was an experienced rider, and the bike was running perfectly. He was traveling north on the iconic Highway 1, a ribbon of asphalt that clings precariously to the edge of the continent. The road was clear, the weather was perfect. It was, by all accounts, a flawless ride. According to the official California Highway Patrol report that would be filed just a few hours later, there were no other vehicles involved. There were no skid marks on the pavement to indicate that he had braked suddenly or swerved to avoid an animal or an obstacle in the road. He was not speeding, for reasons that will never be known, for a reason that died with him in that instant. At approximately 7:35 p.m., just a few miles north of the small coastal town of Cayucos, his 1974 Triumph motorcycle drifted inexplicably from the northbound lane across the center line. It struck a newly installed concrete median divider. The impact was catastrophic. Both Don and the motorcycle were thrown into the air, and the bike, its fuel tank ruptured, exploded in a ball of fire. Don Rich, the 32-year-old musical prodigy, the husband, the father, the architect of the Bakersfield Sound, was killed instantly. The news of Don Rich's motorcycle accident came as a devastating shock to Buck Owens, causing his world to collapse. It wasn't just grief, it was a complete physical and mental devastation. His pain was compounded by overwhelming guilt as he was haunted by his own warnings about the motorcycle Don loved. For Buck, the music died that night. He canceled tours, stopped recording, and fell into a decade-long depression. He couldn't perform without Don by his side because Don was the sound. As Buck famously said, when Don died, half of me was gone. The music was over. To understand this loss, one must see that Don Rich was not just a sideman. He was a partner, an architect, and a co-creator. His irreplaceability was proven by the creative silence that followed in Buck's career. Don redefined the role of the guitar in country music, turning his riffs into catchy hooks. His soaring high harmony was the other pillar, creating their unmistakable signature sound. Buck had the vision, but it was Don who turned that vision into musical reality. He didn't just play the music, he designed the entire musical cathedral. The historical significance of Don Rich extends far beyond his crucial role within the Buckaroos. He was the chief architect of the Bakersfield Sound, a seismic historical event that was the first truly successful commercial alternative to the Nashville monolith. In effect, it was the original outlaw country, a decade before Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings. Their sound was also a crucial bridge between country and rock, paving the way for the entire country rock movement with bands like the Byrds and the Eagles, while influencing rock artists like Keith Richards and a later generation of country stars like Dwight Yoakam. The tragedy of Don Rich isn't just about what he left behind, but the immense potential that was stolen. He died at 32, just as he was beginning a new phase as a producer and shaper of sound. His death wasn't just the loss of a talented artist. It was the end of a musical future that was never written. His death was more than a personal tragedy. It caused a chain reaction that extinguished one of the most important musical movements. When the architect died, the musical cathedral crumbled. Buck Owens, despite his later success, permanently lost the creative fire and joy of his peak years. The story of Don Rich is a profound lesson in loss and a reminder that sometimes the soul of the music isn't the one in the spotlight, but the quiet man in the shadows who makes it all possible.